Well, welcome to the conference room. This is where we have a lot of programs, maritime programs, lots of music here. We have wonderful acoustics in this room, and I love to have music all the time. I want to tell you mostly about my old adventure, my old schooner adventure, the big model behind me here. She's a 122-foot Gloucester fishing schooner, and I sailed her for 25 years. I'll tell you some stories about her. Come on up and have a seat up here, and I'll tell you a few stories about my days in the windjammer business. Now, you know, a sea story could go on for an hour and hours and hours, but I'm not going to do that to you. You can hear more about it in the addendum here. But now I just want to tell you a little bit about the old schooner adventure. She and I were shipmates for more than 25 years. She's a wonderful vessel, Gloucester fishing schooner. We had no engine in her. You can see by the look of her hull here how sleek she is, what a wonderful sailing vessel she is. No engine, we had 6,000 square feet of sail. That was our propulsion. That's the only way we could get around. We had no winches aboard the boat. We did everything with a block and tackle. That's the way the old windjammers were. That's the way Granddaddy sailed these vessels back in the 19th century. Everything was hempen rigging, and you pull on the lines and you get the hairs of the line in your hands, and you pull until your back aches. And that's the way you get the sails up on these vessels. We had 6 sails. That's the old model of the old adventure right over there. You can see her mainsail. Her mainsail is a huge mainsail, 3,150 square feet in the mainsail alone. And all I had was a mate and 2 deckhands, and we had to pull those sails up. And that mainsail weighed more than a ton. But, you know, we had passengers. Didn't have all that much crew, but we had passengers. And we'd line the passengers up there, and they would pull and pull on those hires. They thought it was fun at first because it was easy as the sail started up. But as it got higher and higher, it got heavier and heavier. They had to dig their heels in, and they really started to have to pull hard, you know. And then they would complain, "Oh, I didn't come on this vacation to do this kind of work." And I'd say, "I saw you have that extra pancake at breakfast. Now you get out there and you work some of that off." And they'd be pulling on that line. And just before we get it mastheaded, of course, we had to stop. 1, 2, 3, pull. Everybody would jerk it just as hard as they could. Get that sail up there. We'd make it fast. And then I'd say, "All right, gang, we have 4 more sails to do. Move up to the foresail." And they would go up there. We'd have them doing everything aboard. We'd have them swabbing the decks. We'd have them helping with the dishes. They would do everything there was to, all the chores that were. And the more they did on the vessel, the more they liked it, and the more attached they became to their vessel. So it was great fun. What could be more fun than being captain on a vessel like that? Because the people made their own fun. I'll have to tell you some more of the intricate stories about running that old schooner. You'll have to look at the addendum. Let me tell you just an inkling about her past, though. She was built in 1926 as a Gloucester fishing schooner. She'd go out on the Grand Banks. She would haul fish by the multi-millions of tons, haul fish aboard her and carry them back to market. In 1934, the old captain was out there so cold, every dollop of water that came aboard would freeze before it could run out the scuppers. So he was out there with a great big maul, and he was pounding the rigging and pounding, knocking the ice off of the rails and knocking the ice off of the vessel. Fell dead on deck. They had to get another man for the adventure then, and they got Leo Hines, a Newfoundlander. And I swear, these Newfoundlanders, they're born with sea boots on. Unbelievable fisherman. He caught more fish on the old adventure, my old vessel right here, than any other man out of Gloucester. He made $3.5 million in fish in 20 years that he was skipper of this old boat. Set all the records in the fisheries. She was the all-time highline vessel, and he was the all-time highline skipper. Lots and lots of history here to tell you about. You'll have to look at the addendum and look at some of the period film that we have of her fishing out on the Grand Banks. I want to talk about clipper ships now. What's a clipper ship? What's the name indicate? Well, it means that it's very fast. You know, these vessels, all these great big sailing vessels, they were cargo vessels and they were fat vessels, and the idea was to fill them right full of cargo. But what happened in 1849? They discovered gold in California. Now they had to get people out there, not a heavy cargo, but they needed speed. So what did they do? They took all these old sailing vessels that were burdensome, they fined them up, gave them a bow, sharp bow, and a long run back aft, and a whole cloud of sail on the top of them, so that they would go around Cape Horn and get to California in under 90 days. Donald McKay down in New York built the most clipper ships, but we built one here in Rockland, Maine, incredible vessel called the Red Jacket. The Red Jacket is a ship rig, square rig on 3 masts, great big vessel, the biggest one built in Rockland at that time. And she held the record from New York to Liverpool, England. 13 days and 1 hour she took to cross the Atlantic. An incredible record that has never been beaten. Look at the addendum and get some of the fine details of how this vessel was launched, how she went to New York for rigging, put the sails on her down there. An old Asa Eldridge, a curmudgeon of an old sea captain, sailed her to Liverpool, up the Mersey River, outran the tugboats. They couldn't even catch him to dock him. And he tied her up there, and the British bought that vessel. It was just such an amazing vessel. 13 days and 1 hour across the Atlantic. No vessel ever equaled such a thing as that. They bought her on the spot and ran her in the Australian trade after that. Just to get an idea of her magnitude, take a look out the window here against the building there. That's the midship section frame of the clipper ship Red Jacket in life size. So you can see just the midship section frame, that's her enormity right through the middle of her. Good idea of how big she was. Well, I want to tell you about Nathaniel Bowditch. Nathaniel Bowditch was the guru of celestial navigation. Nathaniel Bowditch wrote the book on navigation, literally wrote the book. This book up here, in the 1700s, The American Practical Navigator. There's no captain before the age of GPS that would go to sea without 3 things. He would have a sextant in his one hand, he would have a chronometer in his other hand, and under his arm he would have Bowditch's book, Computations and Calculations for Celestial Navigation. To find your way at sea where you have nothing to refer to except another wave, this is the way they did it back in the old days. Nathaniel Bowditch, his book is still used today in the Maritime Academy and is standard issue in all the naval vessels in our fleet of Navy ships. This is Nathaniel Bowditch silhouette right here. This is an astrolabe. An astrolabe is an very early instrument. Dated 150 BC, they discovered an astrolabe for taking angles of the sun and of various points of land. This is a seagoing astrolabe. It's a more modern one. It belonged to Nathaniel Bowditch. This is dated 1674, the date right on it. Wonderful instrument. You take this instrument to sea, you can hold it up like this, and you sight through these peeps at the horizon, and then you hold it like this and you sight through these peeps up at the sun. Once you get the angle of the sun in degrees with a simple calculation, you can get a line of position on your chart. A very, very valuable thing to have in the 1700s. But this instrument was a killer back in those days because you're holding it up and you're on a vessel and the vessel is rolling back and forth. And 1 minute the sun is behind your fist, the next minute you're getting it full in the retina. Your eyes were going bad. They were losing their eyesight because looking directly into the rays of the sun that was burning up their retina. What a terrible, terrible instrument, until a man named Davis came along and he developed the backstaff. Here is a backstaff made out of wood, cobbled up. It doesn't even look like a navigational instrument, made out of wood, but it was the greatest advancement in navigation of the time. Greatest advancement for 100 years. They used that backstaff because when you hold it up and sight the horizon, the sun's behind you. A backstaff, that's the way the name is. The sun's behind you and it casts a shadow on the vernier scale here. You can determine its altitude without looking at it. A tremendous, tremendous advancement in navigation. For the next 100 years, they used this backstaff as the weapon of choice to determine your latitude, to determine your position. This backstaff is engraved right down this leg over here. It's hard to see, but you can look closely and see it. Made by George Flowers, 1701, for the William Bowditch family. This was Nathaniel Bowditch's original personal backstaff, and with it probably made some calculations for his book. It is one of America's treasures you'll find right here, nowhere else but at the Sail Power Steam Museum of South Rockland.